Magic Origins has come down, and I don't usually do this for many sets, explicitly because usually the sets we're dealing with aren't this great, but so far, Magic Origins is proving to be like the, oh shoot, this is going to be great for EDH set. So I figured, why don't we head in and kind of digest what's going on with this set, which so far looks to be a fitting end to what we've been seeing from our core sets for a long time. Really quickly, before we even start, I want to talk about just how great core sets have been for Magic the Gathering, explicitly EDH in general. We've gotten some amazing generals from Magic the Gathering core sets, and it's because the core sets have a much different bent than a lot of the other sets in Magic. I know we've definitely discussed it with, I've seen it discussed a lot, but the really cool part about core sets and what's sad about them going away is that the flavor of core sets are much more generalized Magic, the kind of stuff you see in Dungeons and Dragons or in a fantasy setting. Hey, Gap, where the cards are very much more based in what would be cool from a sorcerer from Ravnica to cast, what would be cool from a sorcerer from like the 1720s to cast, and it has a lot more of that classic fantasy flavor, the kind of stuff when people talk about fantasy movies or Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that you expect to see. And I feel like this is another set, this is the last in a long line of sets where it takes that generalized fantasy flavor and really distills it into a really cool place. And not only that, but decided to take these really cool themes from out in the Magic multiverse and pull them together in this cool kind of little flittering on different planes throughout Magic as a way to kind of discover what's going on. And so I figured, instead of just like having random people pop up in chat like, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? We're just going to go through all of them. I have the time, which is nice. I didn't know MTGO wasn't going to pop up until 2.5 hours. I'm not going to be able to talk about Magic Origins spoilers for 2.5 hours, I'm pretty sure, but we're damn well going to try. So the first thing I want to show are the Flip Planeswalkers, and by show I mean this is the order that Mythic Spoiler has them in. The Flip Planeswalkers are all really cool. Are they all great for EDH? Well, I'm not going to say yes. Kythian Hero of Akros, our top left, everyone's favorite Savannah Lions. It's just a 1 mana 2/1 at end of combat. If him and at least 2 other creatures attack this turn, exile Kythian, then return to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. And for 2 and a white, you can make him indestructible. Now, when it comes to commander, we don't have many great. It's really difficult to make a 1 mana commander work well. Actually, incredibly difficult to make a 1 mana commander work well. Unless you're doing something very weird like Norn the Wary, it's kind of difficult to make something that's just a simple Savannah Lions work. In fact, I don't see many times where I wouldn't just want to play like Isamaru. That being said, the Isamaru deck, which is a white deck, the reason why Isamaru is actually played is because he's a really cool 1 mana 2/2 legendary hound. Everyone loves playing some Isamaru. Addy Death Strike, Addy Pino. Where you just get to kind of have some fun with them. And I think you might be seeing Kythian in place of Isamaru soon, simply because of that second ability to just make him indestructible. But here's where it gets funny. You don't get to not use Kythian's ability. So no matter what, you have to go into Gideon Battleforged. Let's get this guy a bit up here. So his +2, so when he becomes transformed, which won't be that hard in EDH, especially if you build a deck around transforming him. Up to 1 target creature an opponent controls attacks Gideon. Just very relevant, just very reminiscent of the original Gideon. +1 until your next turn, target creature gains indestructible, untap that creature, and 0 until end of turn, Gideon becomes a 4/4 human soldier with indestructible, still a planeswalker. Prevent all damage that you dealt him this turn. Addy Gatling. As far as a commander and a commander bent, I think he's going to be decent. I don't expect him to be any more powerful or any less powerful than the Isamaru Voltron deck. And a lot of times, the Isamaru deck would just be overshowered by a Kemba deck because Kemba can pop out little kitties, and that's sometimes all you need. I feel like this general isn't going to be that scary and is going to be very easy to get rid of because that 2 and a white is indestructible to end a turn, which means for a lot of your situations, you can just kill it on your turn or on their turn. You don't really need much to be able to kill your opponent's Gideon. So for me, I don't really expect to see him that much in, of course, I don't expect to see him that much in actual commander, but I think he's a really cool card and it's definitely one that'll be really fun to play with in standard. Now, Jace Viren's Prodigy I think is a little bit different. 1 to blue for an 0/2 that taps to draw a card, then discard a card. There are 5 or more cards in your graveyard. You exile him, then return to the battlefield transformed. That ability in the first hands, not only is it a looter, but already that's going to be super easy to activate in Commander. I'm talking super, super, super easy. But when he flips, he is going to be a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, Telepath Unbound. +1 up to target creature gets -2, -0. -3 to basically flashback an instant sorcery. -9 to get an emblem. If you cast a spell, target opponent puts it out 5 cards or library into the graveyard. I don't expect to see this at all in EDH. I mean, it might be the worst Jace for EDH. Its ultimate is hard to get to, even though you start at 6. And its other abilities are very small, which they have to be because, again, he's a 2-mana O2 that can be able to Planeswalker very quickly in Standard. This was definitely not bent for EDH. But I don't expect to see this guy at all unless 20 years down the road we get like a Jace theme deck somehow and there's just enough Jaces to make a Jace EDH deck. Which, you know, you could probably make a Jace EDH deck soon, to be honest. Of course, Archie. But yeah, I wouldn't even expect to see this in the other 99. I don't think he's going to be... He's not a great commander. He can't deal commander damage. And at the least, he's a looter. And we all know there's many, many, many better mono-blue commanders. Liliana Heretical Healer, though, I think is actually very interesting. So it's 1 black for a 2/3 lifelink. And whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you exile it and return it to the battlefield transformed. If you do, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. You're going to be very, very, very easy to transform Liliana, especially in Commander. It's as simple as like a turn 1 Viserys or a turn 1, or a turn 2 Altar of Dementia. Very easy to flip her, and then you can start plussing her immediately, get her to 5. +2, each player discards a card. -X. Howdy Akvar. Return target non-legendary creature with CMC X from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then -8, you get an emblem. Whenever a creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. Of the commanders, I think this is close to be one of the ones you are most... I think this might be the most likely one you're going to be seeing when it comes to Commander. She's actually not that bad when it comes to in the other 99, which of course there's 2 places to put legendary creatures. But what I really think she would excel in is as a Commander. Being able to get a 5 loyalty Planeswalker on turn 3 is really impressive. And those stats really don't lie. Being able to +2 immediately to discard a card you want is also amazing. I actually really do like her as a commander when it comes to mono black. I think it's going to be very easy to protect her, and especially easy to be able to flip her immediately when she comes into play. And when she gets flipped, being able to just reanimate at a 5 CMC card from your graveyard is going to be fantastic. That can be anything from a Blood Gift Demon to just something really simple like a Phyrexian Delver bringing something else back. So Liliana is going to be really fun, and I do expect to see her in Commander. And getting to that -8 isn't that difficult, especially if you get out early. If you're playing first, or even not playing first, and while your opponents are casting Cultivates, you're casting Liliana Flip, that's going to be very good. And we all know how synergistic Mono Black Sacrifice decks are, so I definitely expect to see this at least as a Commander. In the deck itself is going to be a bit more of a stretch, but I can definitely see wanting to draw Liliana. Because even when she flips, she puts out a 2/2, so that's sometimes just going to be good enough on her own. Right? I definitely expect to see her when it comes to Commander. In both the deck and as a Commander. Not as much Chandra. I love Chandra. We all love Chandra. Chandra has a place in all of our hearts. But she's a 3-mana 2/2 that whenever you cast a red spell and taps, and you can ping her to deal 1 damage to only players. If she has dealt 3 or more damage this turn, you exile her, then return to the battlefield transformed under owner's control. And you can do +1 to deal 2 damage to target players. Do remember, these plus abilities from Chandra do not deal combat damage, neither does her tap ability, which means it does not, again, does not count as commander damage. Very important. -2 to deal 2 damage to our creature. And -7 to deal 6 damage to each opponent. Each player dealt damage this way gets an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, this emblem deals 3 damage to you. Her flip is amazing. Her ulti is amazing. And you may see her in the 5-color Super Friends deck, just because her ulti is so good at ending the game. And she lives after her ulti, which is great, because remember, she gets exiled, then returns to the battlefield, so she does trigger off of Doubling Season. So being able to Doubling Season your Chandra and immediately ult her is going to be one of the ways that the Super Friends decks will actually be able to kill people, which I think is incredibly important, because it's kind of hard for those decks to kill people already. Again, I would not expect her as a Commander. She doesn't seem that great as a Commander. 2 damage to players, obviously not good enough for EDH. For Standard, she seems really fun. I would play her in Standard. She's a 2/2 that pings at the very least. But when it comes to Commander, I wouldn't expect much. Now, of note, the damage just has to be damage she's dealt. That can include combat damage, but Don't expect to see her much as the herald of a deck. Expect to see her in a Super Friends deck because of how good she is if you can flip her. Nissa Vastwood Seer is probably the commander you're most likely to see. This is probably the flip walker you're most likely to see as a commander. Just 2 and a green for a 2/2. When she enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic force, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more land, you exile Nissa that returns to the battlefield transformed under her owner's control. She's already good on 3, and because of the ability in Commander to be able to cast her for increasing amount of mana, it's going to be very easy to cast her multiple times in a game. And in fact, I can see entire decks based around just playing this on 3, get a forest. On 4, play Explosive Vegetation, block with Nissa so you don't take damage. On 6, play Nissa, get a forest, block again. On 7, play Nissa, play a forest, flip her into Sage Animus. +1 to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield, otherwise you put it into your hand. -2 to put a legendary 4/4 elemental creature token onto the battlefield. And -7 to untap 6 lands. They become 6/6 elemental creatures, and they're still lands. The most disappointing part about this card is that the 4/4 is, of course, an elemental creature, but there's no way they couldn't do that when it comes to Standard. But that is definitely, for me, the most disappointing card, because if you could populate this creature, she would be much, much, much better in Commander. But as it stands, she's already really good. At least when you activate her, you get to draw a card immediately, and if it's a land, it goes directly into play, which is awesome. Is she going to be able to beat out some of the better mono-green Planeswalkers? Some of the other mono-green commanders? Hell no. She's not better than Azusa. She's not better than an Omnath. She's not better than a lot of different things. But expect a lot of people who pull this card at their pre-releases and at the release events to start playing EDH and playing with this commander because she's probably an incredibly fun commander. She looks like a blast. And I would also expect to see her in commander decks as well in that other 99. The ability for her to just be a simple Borderland Ranger for 3 is already good enough, but then sometimes she's a Borderland Ranger with value. You can flip her immediately. So anyone who's playing a Borderland Ranger or Sentinel guards is going to probably just switch them right out with Nissa, because now you can turn your Borderland Ranger into a Nissa, and that is that is so much better on the scale of things to do. There is so much more text on this card for 2 and a green than there's in a Borderland Ranger. So I would definitely expect to see this card, see a bunch of play in the other 99 when it comes to Commander. Hey, nobody? Sneaky. Big F. Good to have you. Good to have you. Sadly, she only gets basic forest, but I think that's still good enough. Let's be honest. Again, just pretty much better than Borderland Ranger. But I would expect to see her as a commander, but definitely a lot more in the other 99. She's going to be great in the other 99. Now, there's been a couple of new spoilers, which have all been pretty cool. We're definitely going to go through them. I think Tragic Arrogance is the one that's stirring up the most. Why this is pretty interesting. So, it's a 5-mana sorcery that is the fixed Cataclysm. But for each player, very important here, you choose from among the permanents that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. That player sacrifices all other non-land permanents he or she controls. It's actually kind of nice on Magic Spoilers they put the Cataclysm. Now, what's really important about this is that you get to choose what permanents your opponents control and get to keep in play. I think that's very important, actually. Not only do you get to make sure you have your perfect creature, enchantment, artifact in play, which will be great for Voltron decks, by the way. Excuse me. But you also get to really screw over your opponents. That Eldrazi spawn, that's what you're keeping this turn. Really makes it great, especially when playing against a wide variety of decks. Being able to punish someone who's trying to go wide or being able to punish someone who's playing something Llanowar Elves is very effective. And I definitely expect to see this card come into Commander very quickly. Now, importantly, unlike Cataclysm, it doesn't destroy lands, which I think just makes it a lot better. And importantly is that it forces the players to sacrifice those permanents. A very good way to get around destructible effects. A very good way to make sure your opponent's airboast doesn't stay in play and stuff like that. So I really do expect this card to make a little bit of a splash when it comes to Commander. You're going to see it replace some of the worst Wrath effects, and especially expect to see it in Voltron decks. Although a lot of times it might hit some of your extra equipment, being able to put your opponents down to 1 card when you have something like a Steel of the Godhead on a Bruna, or you have something like a Luxodon Warhammer on a Rift the Awakener, is really, really, really nice. So I would explicitly expect to see this guy see a bunch of play in Commander. I'd probably get the foil because it's a pretty looking card. If an opponent has an enchantment creature, another creature, and another enchantment, can you choose only the enchantment creature? Yes. you can choose the same target for each side. It's a good version of Divine Reckoning, as nobody mentions, which is pretty cool as well. Howdy, Benno. Pick one next Roto Draft? I don't know about that. Artificer's Epiphany, just going to quickly go over it. It'll replace Divination and Artifact decks, and even then it's not really good enough. It is an instant speed draw, too, if you're playing a very heavy Artifact-based deck, if you're playing something like Sharoom. But let's be honest, in EDH, there are so many better things to do that we don't really need to look at this card for too long. Now, Guildleaf Winnower is very interesting. They're really trying to cement... this is the new spoiler from Evan Irwin's. They're really trying to cement elves in black-green instead of in green-white. This was a little bit of a push and pull from the Lorwyn Shadowmoor split. In Lorwyn, the elves are black-green. In Shadowmoor, the elves are green-white, playing with Persist. You can see the difference between Rise the Exiled and Rise the Redeemed. Rise the Redeemed, of course, being everyone's favorite green-white token-making commander until Tristani came around. Rise the Exiled being the black-green elf commander you'd play if you didn't have Natha Guildleaf. But Guildleaf Winnower herself is 3 black for a 4/3. When she enters the battlefield, you may destroy target non-elf creatures whose power and toughness aren't equal. She's got Menace, so she can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. I don't know how great this card is in EDH. A lot of the times, Magic really likes to be symmetrical when it comes to power and toughnesses. You don't really see too many non-equal power and toughnesses. Don't get me wrong, she can get some pretty good cards out of the way. Something like a Visara can go away. Something like a... Sylvos can get destroyed. I don't know. It's hard to think of non-equivalent power and toughness off the top of my head. She seems fun. I would definitely play her if I was playing a black-green elf warrior deck, an elf deck, just because she can be a 4/3 for 5 when I want it to. It's very hard to block because it's a menace, so it can be blocked up by 2 more creatures. But the ability to use that come into play, that ETB, that 187, is going to be pretty difficult. At least I would think so. In EDH, are you going to find a target? Maybe, but it's not going to be as consistent as your favorite Necrotal. So always keep that in mind. All the Dragon Lords. MTGO is going to be down for another 2.5 hours. I don't plan on going over Magic Origins for 2.5 hours, but we'll just keep soldiering through. Magmatic Insight, I think, is pretty interesting. So it's a single red mana sorcery, initial cost to cast it, discard a land card, then draw 2 cards. One of the worst cards to draw at the top of your library, but actually pretty interesting. It's what red wants to do. When you draw land, you want to get rid of those lands immediately. And it's actually pretty good in any deck that wants to use lands like Borborygmos Enraged. This is definitely a card I would play in Borborygmos Enraged. That being said, I don't expect to see it in any decks that aren't niche decks that want to put lands in the graveyard. If you're not playing a Life from Loam deck, I don't see a reason to play this card, but it's very good opposite Life from Loam. But again, just a card made for Standard or Modern, not really for us EDH players. Now, this card that doesn't look like it says something is Nissa's Revelation. It's a 7-mana sorcery. Scry 5, then reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, draw cards equal to its power, and gain life equal to its toughness. This is definitely one of those cards that I don't think is that great. It's one of those cards that looks really cool on the front of it. Like, whoa, for 7 mana, I could like gain 10 life and draw 10 cards. That is sick, but in reality, it's just not going to be good enough. It's 7 mana, and it will put that creature into your hand because you're going to draw that creature when you reveal it, and that's cool. It's so expensive. For this amount of mana, you can cast Tooth and Nail Unentwined. For this amount of mana, you can cast at least a 4 on Genesis Wave. For this amount of mana, you can play Sylvos. For this amount of mana, you can do a majority of awesome things. And I just don't really think when it comes to Commander, it's going to be worth a slot. It's going to be very hard to convince me to play this over a Dragon Lord. Or to convince me to play this over an Avenger Zendikar. Or to convince me to play this over like a Kamal Fist Krosa. Good luck. It's not going to happen. That gaining life and drawing cards is really cute, and if you reveal a Palaka Worm, oh my god, we gain 7 and draw 7. It doesn't mean you don't get smashed in the face the next turn, especially in a 4-player game. So the Scry 5, again, pretty cool just for the card selection, but I would not expect to see this coming in. Yeah. I think the art is telling you what to do with it. Hey, we found Emrakul. Let's draw 15 and gain 15. Evil lies in the mountain. Nissa confronts the waves of madness and sets it free. Ooh, it's not a good idea. Is it Ugin in the artwork? No, this is actually... It looks like Emrakul to me. You've got the... up on the left here, you have the head of Emrakul. And then this is like the middle area. And the reference is, of course, to releasing an Eldritch Monstrosity that Waves of Madness sets it free. So definitely more of an Eldrazi card here. Yeah, it's 100% Emrakul. Which, I mean, draw 15, gain 15 is pretty cute. This is an interesting spell I don't expect to see play because we have Cat Sun Zenith. 5 double white for an instant, put 4 2/2 white knight creature tokens as vigilance onto the battlefield, which is cool. Definitely a very good callback to Ravnica. You can even see the Boros guys in the back. Ravnica, of course, utilizing 2/2 white vigilance knights a lot, like stuff like Unquestioned Authority and really fun cards like that. But Spell Mastery, if there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, creatures you control get indestructible. Again, 7 mana is so hard to kind of make this worth it. For 7 mana with White Sun Zenith, you get an extra cap, but I guess your guys don't consistently get indestructible. I think it's cool, but I just, it'd be so hard to convince me to put this in a slot again. It just feels like there's so many better cards I would rather play than Gideon's Phalanx when it comes to Commander. Something like Decree of Justice, that's much more modal. You can go for that cycling and for those 1/1s coming into play, or you can go for that huge Angels, even just something like Pegasus Refuge. Like, there's just so many better cards in Gideon's Phalanx. I don't expect to see it immediately translate to Commander. That being said, this card can be a little bit of a blowout. If you've ever gotten the chance to play with those instant speed, make your guys indestructible spells, there's something like Ghostway. These abilities are very strong when it comes to Commander, especially when you're playing a token deck. But the problem with these type of spells is that you already have to have an established board. Gideon's Phalanx kind of makes it a little bit easier on you. Instead of having to have an established board before that Wrath comes down to be able to get your opponent, you can now just go Gideon's Phalanx in response to your Wrath. I don't care about what you're doing. Give me 4 2/2s. That could be very attractive, especially if you're playing a green-white token-based deck against something like Rise of Redeemed or Tristani. Could be very good with a card like Gideon's Phalanx. But I still don't think it's good enough to see consistent play in Commander. Do I think it's going to see play in certain decks because someone's going to pull foil 1 and someone's going to cast it? And do I expect to be blown out by this card sometime soon? Yes to all of them. But I don't expect to see me playing this card anytime soon when it comes to Commander. Again, the mana cost is so prohibitive, even if it is an instant, that it doesn't really feel like it's worth it. Now, a deck I could see it in just because it would be super cute would be Magetta the Lion. If you've never seen Magetta the Lion, it's pretty awesome. It's a old school commander for 5. It's a 3/3 itself, and you can discard 2 cards to destroy all creatures except for Magetta. They can't be regenerated. This would be a very, although expensive, very fun combo with your Magetta deck. Just be like, oh yeah, activate Magetta, in response, cast Gideon's Phalanx, make sure that I discarded at least an instant or sorcery to make sure I get the indestructible. I could see that being some way someone won the game. And Magetta, of course, already runs mana acceleration effects like Cage Sun, so it could be really cool. It might be a really cool idea for that type of deck, but very expensive to pull off. And I'm definitely not going to be looking forward to playing Gideon's Phalanx. But I am looking forward to getting blown out by it. I'm a lover of Limited, and this card is going to be obnoxious in Limited. It's a 4 mana 2/2 that puts 2 1/1 flying Thopters into play. And you can tap to untap artifacts to make sure that target creature can't be blocked. This card is going to be busted in Limited. If you see this in your pack, you take it immediately. There's also a couple of other commanders you might want to play this card in. I know I personally have an Afara tokens build that would love to see a Whirler Rogue in it. Something like Brago as well, being able to utilize its enter battlefield, leave the battlefield effects is very strong, and as a 2/2 can be gotten back off of a Revelark, which is 4 power for 2, which is great. Especially if you're like larking back, if you lark back into play a Rogue and like a Mirror Entity, your opponents are dead. Like right now, your opponents are dead. Thanks for trying. It's definitely a very cool card and one I will definitely try and fit into specific decks when it comes to Commander. Just a card you always want to keep in mind. That tap to untap artifacts you control to make a creature unblockable is an ability. That's a real ability. That is a substantial way to make sure you can kill people. Being able to make, especially in Limited by the way, being able to make your big 5 power creature unblockable just by tapping 2 creatures is strong and definitely something I would expect to see. And remember, they don't have to be creature artifacts. You can just tap like your Mind Stone and your Exploration map. And oh, look, my commander has unblockability, especially for, again, Brago EDH. Being able to make your commander unblockable to get that trigger off of Brago is going to be very, very, very good. Expect to see some Brago decks soon. Howdy, Adam. Yeah, and as Valen mentions, making Brago unblockable is definitely the little kicker to this lady. It's going to be very cool. Expect to see it soon. And by soon, I mean when this set comes out. Necromantic summons, our newest 5 and a black, Raise Dead. Not Raise Dead, Zombify. Just put our creature from a battlefield graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Spell Mastery gets 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it. Not anything we expect to see. We expect to play in Commander. We obviously have a lot better cards and even creatures that do this better. But just really fun because it's an elk, and I know the limited resources guys were going gaga over it. Oh no, they killed Elmer, and it's like, don't worry. But yeah, I don't expect to see this card in Commander unless you're making like an elk themed deck, which is like, all right. Gearcrafter, I think, is a pretty interesting card. Not as good as the last whirling creature we mentioned, but just a simple 2 and red 2/1 that puts a Thopter into play. Can be good enough if you're going for an aggressive token build for Commander. I could actually see this guy explicitly in something like a Tajik Blade Legion deck, just putting extra creatures into play to make sure you can get that battalion on Tajik. He's also very good in, and I said Tajik because I was thinking of a different commander, and I can't remember the name, but he is the 3 red Jorkadeen, the Prevailer. This is definitely a creature that I expect to see in Jorkadeen. It's a 2/1 that can then become a 5/1. That puts a 1/1 that can then become a 4/1 into play. Gets closer to Metalcraft, makes it a lot easier to activate your Jorkadeen. Can be blinked if you want to blink. He's going to be pretty good. I wouldn't say like, oh, EDH staple. I will say that it looks pretty cool, and I definitely can't wait to play it. Yeah. Hey, remember when enchantments were like the main theme of Theros? Everyone was like, man, I wish there was a card that was really synergistic with enchantments. Herald of the Pantheon. 1 and a green for Grizzly Bear. That makes enchantments cost 1 less to cast. Already good enough, by the way. Whenever you cast an enchantment, you also gain 1 life. And of note, that's cast, not when that enchantment comes into play. Very good, because it's kind of easy to blink enchantments. This card will see play in Commander 100%. It's already Enchantress players' favorite friend. And there's actually some enchantments, like the Overgrowth type effects, that can actually net you mana with Herald of Pantheon, which is going to be hilarious and scary at the same exact time. I, again, 100% expect to see this guy in Standard. Sorry, not Standard, in Commander. I 100% to see a bunch of foils of this guy go off the block very quickly. This card will see play in Commander. And is definitely, if you have an Enchantress deck, Enchantress decks being enchantment-based strategies that like to play enchantments to draw cards. These are the kind of cards that play the card Enchantress Presence. This goes immediately into Enchantress decks. There's some more expensive enchantments that can definitely decrease the cost, which is nice. And yeah, 100% going to be seeing play. And should be pretty fun. Now, I'll note that it's whenever you cast an enchantment, so if you were to play, I don't know, a Farika deck, those little snakes that come into play won't be gaining you life. It is casting enchantments. Very important to keep that in mind. But this will see play in Commander. I know I'm excited about it, so. Hallowed Moonlight, though. We actually talked about this during our last stream. This, if you want to blow out people, if you're one of those players in multiplayer, and I'm sometimes one of those players in multiplayer, where you just kind of sit down and you're like, well, I don't want you guys to have fun. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? Like, well, let me show you Hallowed Moonlight. This card is busted. It's not busted, but it's silly. 1 and a white for an instant. Draw a card. Alright. Until end of turn, if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. Yes, that is basically what Containment Priest says, as they mentioned down here on the Mythic spoiler site. But Jesus Christ, the main thing on this is that it also doesn't say non-token. So if your opponent plays that like Gideon's Phalanx card we talked about earlier, you just go Hallowed Moonlight and you stare them down in the eyes and you're like, what's up, punk? I'm going to draw a card and you get no tokens. It is a substantially great card. Expect to see this in play. This is so easy to slot into your other 99 too. You can just be playing a white deck and be playing a Hallowed Moonlight and randomly annihilate your opponent. If you look at a card like Genesis Wave, you're like, lol, I don't care anymore. This card is so good. Also, of note, it just kills Splinter Twin. Obviously, all those tokens your opponents make off Splinter Twin go away. Good against Kikijiki decks in that simulation. Very good against Elf decks, against Goblin decks, against Sliver decks even. Just the ability to prevent those tokens from coming into play during that turn is very strong. Your Krenko player goes, well, gonna go off with Mana Echoes, cast Hallowed Moonlight, get an extra turn, and draw a card. Hallowed Moonlight going to be definitely one of the most impacting cards when it comes to Standard and Modern, but also a card I expect to see heavy play in EDH. Especially if you're playing like in a 1v1 league, like I always call it French Commander, but a dual Commander league. Hallowed Moonlight is definitely a card I would put in my dual commander deck. Because if your opponent's not playing a deck made for it, you can just, you know, get rid of it. But if your opponent's playing Brago, if your opponent's playing Brago, they don't exist anymore. They're like, oh, about that. Hallowed Moonlight, when you targeted all your permanents that now leave the battlefield and enter the battlefield, they just get exiled instead. So good. I cannot wait to play this card a bunch. And this is going to be fetchable off Sunforger. Fetchable off Sunforger, like Vest mentions. Damn. I didn't even think of that, and that is quality. Talent of the Telepath. There's actually a lot of really cool cards coming out of this set, which, again, Magic Origins being really cool coming up. Oh, Isochron Scepter. Isochron Scepter, this would be a fun card to have on too, because you can at least cantrip, of course. And also, if you want to put up a card, just go exclamation mark card Isochron Scepter. And it should bloop up. See? It blooped. Talent of the Telepath. 4 mana, sorcery. Target opponent reveals the top 7 cards of their library. You can then cast an instant sorcery card from among them without paying its mana cost. Then the player puts the rest into their graveyard. And for Spell Mastery, if there are 2 or more instant sorcery cards in my graveyard, I can cast 2 of those revealed instant sorcery cards instead of 1. This card will see play in Commander. People already play cards like Stolen Goods. People already play cards like Acquire or Bribery. I'm not saying it's nearly as strong as Bribery. I don't think it's nearly as strong as Bribery. But I will say this is a card I cannot wait to cast in Commander. Being able to get such strong cards, even if you get like a 4C, you're net even, right? Like, let's say you cast a Cultivate or you cast something else. Or if you're like me and you're playing Riku, you've cast Cultivate, Kodama's Explosive Vegetation. Being able to cast Talent Telepath with that Spell Mastery ability. And very importantly is that you do cast those additional instant and sorcery cards, making it very good with Mind's Eye. Not Mind's Eye. Eye of the Storm, by the way. This card is amazing with Eye of the Storm. This card is going to be a blast. I cannot wait to play it. And it is going to be in a lot of red-blue EDH decks in the future. Going to be a lot of Tamir EDH decks in the future. It's just a fun card. Left, up, down, left, right, just fun all over. It will see playing Commander, whether you're playing a wacky Teamer Ramp deck or you're playing anything else. Yeah. So the reason why I mentioned Eye of the Storm, whenever a player casts an instant sorcery card, you exile it, then that player copies each instant already exiled in Eye of the Storm. For each copy that player may cast a card without paying its mana cost. This actually is a kill condition with Eye of the Storm, now that I look at it. Because you get to cast the copies off of the Talent of the Telepath when you have an Eye of the Storm out, you can cast Talent of the Telepath with Eye of the Storm out, you then exile it, put it on the stack, you then exile it. You still get to cast 2 instant sorceries from your opponent's library off the top 7. Then those get exiled to put under Eye of the Storm as well. Then for each one that was cast, also triggers Talent of the Telepath again. You can actually very effectively mill all your opponents out with Eye of the Storm. And it's going to be so much fun. So yeah, just keep that in mind. It's the new kill condition for Eye of the Storm. Despoiler of Souls, definitely a card that was made to be like the makeshift Bloodghast or Icarid. Black for a 3/1 that can't block. Black, exile 2 other creature cards from your graveyard, return Despoiler of Souls from your graveyard to the battlefield. This card just isn't good enough for EDH. It's probably good enough for Standard, might be good enough for Modern, but just isn't good enough for EDH. The fact that you have to exile 2 other creatures just makes it strictly worse than a lot of other cards that are already in the format. Although it's very cool, and it's a black 3/1 that can't block. I mean, you could play this in like a Suicide Black deck, and that'd be pretty fun, but if there's one thing EDH players love to do, it's definitely delve into their graveyard. And Explorer of Soul says, no, we're going to exile your creatures instead, and that's just not good enough for it. Abbot of Carol Keep. This guy's going to be fun. 1 in a red 2/1 with Prowess. Whenever this guy enters the battlefield, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. Very reminiscent of Chandra Pyromancer 0, but also reminiscent of like Volcanic Vision and stuff like that. It turns out that Wizards has found the new draw mechanic for red, and that's exiling the top card of your library. It's very, very, very cool. If you're playing an aggressive red deck, this is the type of card you might want to play. If you've ever wanted to play a card like Volcanic Vision, I think this might be a little bit better, especially with that prowess trigger. It seems very good in blue-red, and especially good in blue-red decks that like modify the top of their library. Looking at you, Melek. This seems like a great card for Melek. You get that prowess trigger, and you get to know the top card of your library already, so you can really utilize Abbott effectively. In fact, I think this is an auto-include in a Melek deck, because you can get lands off the top to be able to get instant sorceries on top instead. Do I expect to see a bunch of playing Commander? Hell no. It's a 2-mana 2-1. We need a lot better things from 2-mana 2-1s, like Snapcaster Mages. But there are going to be very specific decks that are going to want this card. Keep this card in mind when playing against blue-red decks. This will be a card you do see show up in that other 99, and you should at least be aware of. Outland Colossus. Not only is the art of this card just beautiful, but it's a 5-mana 6/6. Already good enough stats, even for Commander, with Renown 6. So whenever this guy deals combat damage to a player, if it's Renown, put 6+1/+1 counters on him, and it becomes Renowned. And it can't be blocked by more than one creature. It's a giant, so if you're going for like a Naya Giant deck, he fits into your Naya Giant deck. But overall, although he's a huge body for 5 mana, again, it just is kind of outmoded by other cards that are just simply better. The fact that you have to already deal combat damage to a player to get that Renown 6 means that this card's already getting through, and you can be playing something better in its place, like a Colonian Hydra, or an Arbor Colossus. I think it's even better than Outland Colossus. Arbor Colossus can at least kill your opponent's flyers. It's a card I would love to play in Standard, and a card you will see go into one of my Commander decks just because it looks gorgeous. I think this card is gorgeous, and it looks so cool that I'm probably going to play it just because the art is that awesome. In Standard, is it going to be good enough? Probably. It can't be blocked by more than one creature. It's going to be pretty hard to put up better stats in 6/6, except with Deathmist Raptor in the format, I don't expect this guy to get through many green decks. I think he's very cool. I would not expect to see him in a lot of Commander decks, unless you're playing like a red-green stompy deck. And those decks do exist. In fact, I just put together one for when I'm playing EDH on Thursday. It's just a red-green. I'm playing like Kragrick Cremator. This goes great in like a red-green giant deck. Maybe like a Rurik Thar deck. Just a way to punish your opponent's creatures for being smaller than yours. But let's be honest, this just isn't that great. It would be better with Trample, as Snafu mentioned. I think that's mainly the big thing. It's just better with Trample. And that's very easy to do in Gruul, by the way. I could definitely see this guy in like a Seton deck that wants to play cards like Primal Rage or Gruul Warplow as a way to give your creatures Trample. There's actually, I remember talking to Archie about this, or maybe just on stream before. He's actually pretty good in the Sarkhan deck. Not new Sarkhan, but old Sarkhan, where, I keep saying Sarkhan, it's not Sarkhan at all. Bear Punch guy. Surak the Dragonclaw. He's actually very good in a Surak deck because Surak gives your other creatures trample. I would expect to see him in a Surak deck because it's a very easy, play this guy on 5, flash in Surak on 6 to give him trample, get Renown immediately. That is a deck I could see Outland Colossus being played in. And in fact, one of my favorite builds of the Surak deck is that look at all these green creatures that don't have trample because it'd be too powerful. This definitely goes in the green creature camp that would be too powerful with trample. Oh, speaking of powerful, this card is messed up good. Archangel of Tithes is a 4-mana 3/5 with flying. As long as it's untapped, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. That's alright. That's a pretty good ability. It's like half of a pass. It's half of a Ghostly Prison. Whatever. That's decent on a creature, especially if you make multiples, right? As long as it's attacking, creatures can't block unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. That's messed up good. That is an incredibly strong ability in Commander. You're now forcing your opponents to keep up mana when it's not their turn, when you're attacking. That is strong. And if you give this lady Vigilance, if you're playing this in a Helia deck, they still can't attack you back. Archangel of Tithe is going to be one of the most annoying cards you're going to be playing against in Commander for like the next 3 years. It's a kill on sight card. You can always use more kill on sight cards when you're building your Commander decks. This card is strong. S-T-R-O-N-G, strong. Expect to see it get played. I don't know how much it costs, but it should cost a bunch of money for a very long time. And the stats are also very odd. It's a 3/5, so it can block very effectively as well. I adore this card. And I would definitely expect to see it do some pretty strong things for a long time in the format. Hey, Wafiki, thanks for resubscribing, man. I appreciate your constant support. That's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, this card though, this card is sick. It is great in your Angel decks. It's actually just really good in an Aurelia deck. If you play Archangel of Ties, play Aurelia on the next turn, your opponent doesn't have time to leave up blockers. In fact, I can definitely see a couple of turns that go like Archangel of Ties into something like would be a good card to play after my Archangel of Ties on 5. Oh, into like a Glory of Warfare, into Aurelia Attack twice. Your opponents aren't going to be able to put out creatures in enough time to block. You have a 5/5 and another. You have two 5/5s crashing in, a 5/5 and a 5/4 crashing in twice. It's going to be so much fun. This is definitely one of those cards I'm going to grab when it gets low enough, because it should eventually get low enough. Disciple of the Ring is probably the blue mythic that I don't think people were expecting, and probably just I don't think is good enough for Commander, but we should talk about it, right? It's a 5-mana 3/4. It's a human wizard, which, I mean, hey, it's a wizard. People play wizards. For 1 mana, you can exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard and then choose 1. Counter target non-creature spell unless the controller pays 2. It gets +1/+1 till end of turn. You can tap target creature or untap target creature. I think the main part about this card is really the countering target non-creature spell unless the controller pays 2. If you have a Disciple of the Ring out and you're trying to just prevent your opponents from being able to play their Overrun to win the game, or preventing them from playing their Warp World, preventing them from playing their Boundless Realms, preventing them from playing, heck, even their Rite of Replication, Disciple of the Ring does that job pretty well, especially if you have enough instant sources in your graveyard. I could almost see playing this in a Talrand deck, but a lot of times in a Talrand deck, you'd just be better off playing like a Desertion. I don't expect to see a lot of play in Commander. I think it'll see about as much play as a card like Beguiler of Wills. Although Beguiler of Wills is very fragile, and this at least has 4 toughness, I just don't see it being that great. Especially when it's explicitly Commander. Maybe in Standard it has a home, maybe in Modern it has a home. But if there's one thing I know about EDH decks, that they love their graveyard, and exiling cards out of your graveyard is one of the cardinal sins of EDH card design. Let's be honest. Especially, as I mentioned before, with that bad Nixithid. Sorry, not Nixithid, with that bad Icarid. Exiling creatures out of your graveyard is a cardinal sin in black. Exiling instant and sources out of your graveyard is almost as bad in blue. So I don't expect to see a lot of play in Commander. It could see playing like a tribal wizard deck, but besides that, yeah. Priest of the Bloodright. So this is a card that might not have gotten much hype when it comes to Standard. This card should get a lot more hype when it comes to EDH. It's a 5-mana 2/2 that enters the battlefield to put a 5/5 black demon creature token flying onto the battlefield. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 2 life. Number 1, don't care about that in Commander. Number 2, this card is great. Players love making tokens. It's probably it's probably like the second favorite deck archetype behind like killing people. And this guy has a low enough cost at 5 mana for a 2/2 that making the 5/5 is worth it. That's 7 power for 5 mana. That's good enough for EDH. But that enter the battlefield clause is amazing. If you're playing a deck like Aetherios, it's great. If you're playing a deck like Carador, it's great. It's even a human cleric. I know there's a bunch of white-black cleric decks running around. It's one of people's favorite white-black decks to build in Commander. This is a great card to slot into those type of builds. Being able to make 5/5s, being able to flicker your own creature to make more 5/5s is something people love to do, and is definitely a card I expect to see go into Commander immediately. Just immediately. It's a 5/5 flyer for 5 and a free sacrifice. It is exactly what you want to do. This is a card that will see a bunch of play in Commander, and a card that I honestly can't wait to play. This card seems awesome. I definitely want to get a foil of it because it's also just beautiful David Palumbo art. Of note, I always like to keep track of creatures that have 2 power for Revelark, and this creature also has 2 power for Revelark. Which means your Lark can get this guy back, and being able to bring back a 2/2 and get an extra 5/5 into play by using your Lark is strong. White-black sacrifice decks, especially white-black decks built around Revelark, are going to like this guy. Be aware. Scab Clan Berserker, definitely more of a standard card than an EDH card. It's a 3-mana hasty 2/2 with Renown 1. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, if this is Renowned, it deals 2 damage to the player. We've known for a while this effect wasn't good enough for EDH. There's definitely decks that like playing this type of decks, like Zozu the Punisher likes playing these type of we're going to deal damage over time. But honestly, it's not good enough for Commander. It's a fun card. It's got interesting looking art from Dave Kendall, but It's not going to see much playing Commander. I never like automatically dismissing cards, especially Berserkers that can be played in Lavisa Cold Eyes, but I'm going to immediately dismiss this card and say it's not good enough for Commander. This card is, though. Oh, damn. Not only is there a Lemuria, I think is the name of these things, right? Lemuria or something weird. I'm not going to look it up on Google because it's just going to be weird monster porn. But this card is going to see so much play. I would get your foils now. If there's a promo version of this card, get the promo version now. This card is going to continue and going to be consistent in price. Well, hold up. It's going to go down in price first. So don't get it on pre-release weekend. Don't get it on release weekend. Wait like 2 months unless a standard deck bursts out. But this card is sick. 1 and a green for an enchantment for a single green mana, sack a creature. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It's a lot to take in for a simple ability, but you can sacrifice any creature, not non-token creatures, which means you can sacrifice tokens. Thumbs up. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. The fact that it doesn't put the other creatures in, that doesn't put the other cards into your graveyard is a little bit of a knock on this card. If this guy put those cards in the graveyard, it would be one of the best cards in Commander. But the fact that you can now turn tokens into other creatures is going to be something that sees a lot of play when it comes to Commander, and not to mention just as applications like a Reconnaissance type ability. A Reconnaissance being a white mana enchantment that you can pay 0 to untap your creatures during combat, which allowed you to, like, you could attack with your entire team, not only give them vigilance, but save the creatures that would get blocked. Now with Evolutionary Leap, you can attack with your 3/2/2 elf tokens. Your opponent has a 3/3, block one of your elf tokens. Let's turn that into another elf. This card is going to see a lot of play in Commander. It is going to be a scary card in Commander, and is definitely a kill on-site card when it comes to Commander. Heck, just think it like there's just a bunch of guys that love this card immediately. Prosh, instant auto-include. Ulash the Hate Seed, instant auto-include. There are so many Commanders that have been looking for a card like this for a very long time to increase in power level, and it's finally here. Although green didn't need to be stronger when it came to Commander, this card makes green stronger for Commander. It's not better than Survival, but it is definitely one of the best cards printed for Commander, and thankfully it's a rare instead of a mythic rare, so I can keep it forever. So we have, I thought this guy was legendary for a while, but we got a Pegasus. It's a Pegasus, guys. It's just a simple 2 and a white 2/1 flyer that makes non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Expect to see it in Thalia decks. It's got some pretty art from Seb McKinnon, whoever that guy is. Good job. But I know there's definitely some taxing EDH decks out there, decks that like to run stuff like Smokestack. Overall, it's going to be decent. It's not going to be the best card ever made, but it's going to be decent. And it's probably going to make its way into certain decks that like playing these taxing type of decks. If a deck's playing Thalia, it's going to play Vryn when it comes to Commander. I don't know about Standard or Modern. I don't know how great these kind of tax effects are in Standard or Modern or even Legacy. I'm not putting much stock into it. It's just a 2/1 flyer. It's very easy to kill. But again, expect to see it in this type of decks that love taxing your opponents. The kind of decks that play stuff like Defense Grid. The kind of stuff that plays stuff like Sphere of Resistance will be playing Vryn Wingmare. Thalia decks exist. I don't know why they... the reason why I thought this was a legendary creature is because it has a name, and it's not a legendary creature. Why not give us legendary Pegasi? I don't know why they won't do it. It's not cool, man. Alright. This card scares me. It's called Thopter Spy Network. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, let's put a 1/1 Thopter into play. Okay, that thing's got flying. Whenever one or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now, it's not a Biden of Thassa. It's not a it's not a Coastal Piracy, but it's still very good. The ability to get 1/1s consistently is going to be great in a deck like Arkham Daxam, where you already want to even be playing artifact lands, and being able to sacrifice them with Arkham Daxam is magnifique. But the ability to continually get cards is great. I would expect to see this in decks like Shroom pretty quickly, especially decks with artifact lords. Being able to consistently get a 1/1 is great. Yeah, I know you can only get one. I got that part down. but it's a great card. As actually the comments immediately say it comes with Skull Clamp, and I can't agree more. It does. I cannot agree more. It does amazing work with the Skull Clamp. I expect to see this card in Commander decks, especially in artifact-based blue decks. There's always been room in artifact-based blue decks I found for like non-artifact spells. It's definitely one of those non-artifact spells that will find its way into artifact-based blue decks. I don't think there's really much else to say about this card. Definitely expect to see that in decks like Sharoom. Expect to see it, especially in decks like Arkham Dax, and the ability again to sacrifice those Thopters to get better artifacts. If you have 3 creatures so whenever one or more artifact creature you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Even if you attack your opponent with 5 Thopters, you only draw 1 card. Which is important to keep in mind. That means that it's not a Coastal Piracy. If you read Coastal Piracy, it says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Because it says whenever one or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage, it pings when basically the effect triggers when an artifact creature deals damage. And then if more than one, it's still the same trigger because it reads all that damage from artifact creatures as one big trigger to draw 1 card. Infinite Obliteration, the definition of a card I don't expect to see in Commander, but interesting for Standard, I guess. The 3-mana sorcery, name a creature card, search your opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name, and exile them, and that player shuffles their library. If you're playing against your friends and they have a combo deck and you're tired of losing to Kiki-Jiki, you can play Infinite Obliteration. Otherwise, don't play it in your Commander decks. It's not worth it. Molten Vortex, the worst Seismic Assault. Single red enchantment for a red mana, discard a land card. Molten Vortex deals 2 damage to a creature or player. Again, just immediately gets hit out by a Seismic Assault. I could see it being played in decks that need Seismic Assault to win the game. There aren't that many of them when it comes to Commander. Most of those decks have been supplanted by a Borborosi and Rage deck. In Borborosi and Rage decks, you don't need another Seismic Assault. I don't expect to see much playing Commander at all, really, just because there's a strictly better card. Because you don't have to pay mana. And not strictly better, sorry. It is not strictly better. There is just a significantly better card that's already in the format called Seismic Assault. And also has better art, because it's a flame fist punching a Drake, which is awesome. Hey! Animus Awakening. Oh, I love you. It's an X and a green sorcery. Reveal the top X cards of your library. Put all lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And for spell mastery, if there are 2 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, make sure you untap those lands. Animus Awakening is sick. The cool part about this is you actually can't mill yourself out, so you could cast Animus Awakening for like 100 and just put all your lands into play and then probably untap them, and then your deck has no more lands in it, which is great. Unless someone casts Mind Fuel on you, because then you lose. But this card is going to see play in Commander. I think it's super fun. I would not want to cast it for less than 5. If you cast it for like 5 or less, there's definitely So the interesting thing about Animus Awakening is that you have to make an argument for it being better than Boundless Realms. Boundless Realms are already triggers off of your lands in play to double the amount of lands you have in play. That is very substantial. Animus Awakening is definitely better in a deck like Omnath. Omnath can slowly develop mana over time by just keeping mana in its pool, which is very effective. And Animus Awakening is a great card for a deck like Omnath because you might only have 4 lands in play, but you'll have 7 mana in your pool, so you could do X equals 6, which will probably get you more lands than something like Boundless Realms. I do expect this card to see play in Commander, again, in decks that are looking to put mana into their mana pool that is not strictly from lands, if that makes sense. I could definitely see it being put in an elf deck that plays a bunch of, like, the elf lord that adds green to your mana pool for each elf you control. But overall, Animus Awakening is a very cool sorcery. I would explicitly expect to see it play in Commander. Titania, as Akbar mentioned, is pretty cool. But you have to make sure that it's better than Boundless Realms for your deck. And that's going to be pretty hard to do, because Boundless Realms will consistently be better unless you're playing a deck that produces a lot of non-land mana, I guess is the best way to put it. Crewfix, as Gaduk mentions, is another good example of a commander that really likes Animus Awakening. Night of the White Orchid's coming back. We've already seen Night of the White Orchid in Commander for a while. It's a very cool creature. It's a human knight 2/2 with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search a library for a planescard upon the battlefield and shuffle your library. There's nothing really more from Out of the White Orchid. It's always been there. It's always been decent. I definitely play it in aggressive white decks. It's actually very good if you're playing like a knight deck, which do exist and people make them all the time. I actually really like it in my Selvala deck. Selvala just produces a bunch of green mana, but Knight of the White Orchid can get you those planes, very important non-basic planes, and bring them into play. We got a Merfolk Wizard coming into play. It's going to see, I think it might see play in Merfolk. I'd almost expect it more to just see play in Thassa because it's a blue 2/2. But when it enters the battlefield, you may return target tapped creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. And you may cast it as though it had flash, pay 2 or more mana to cast it. It will see play in Merfolk deck. Merfolk decks are always looking for more Merfolk to put into them, whether it be Sig River Cutthroat or Sig River Guide, or even something like Ambassador Lakvataz. They're always looking for more Merfolk to play with. And this guy's very good just because your opponent could be attacking you with a single creature to kill you. Like, if I'm attacking you with my Borborygmos, you can just be like, for 4 mana, I bounce it to your hand. And you're like, oh, well that sucks. And then you get to attack him for 5 with this guy. But he's not great. He's not even amazing. But I'm probably like at a 6 out of 10. I don't know where you put 6 out of 10s. I put 6 out of 10s at good. I expect it, again, explicitly in decks that want to take advantage of its tribal archetype. Unless you're playing a fish deck, which is surprisingly enough not a Merfolk deck, but references Merfolk decks, which is the idea of just playing a very quick white-blue deck, just putting out very efficient creatures. That'd be a lot better in an Edric deck. I could definitely see, wow. Harbinger of the Tide seems great in an Edric deck, if you want to play Edric. Although, ban and dual commander allowed in multiplayer commander. But I don't think there's really much else to say about Harbinger of the Tides. I would pick one up. I would expect to see it being played in some Merfolk decks here or there, but I would never pay more than like $5 for it. I hate this card. I hate this card because the design doesn't make sense for me. So 2 and a black for a 1/4 with Death Touch. It's a human warrior. It's called Graveblade Marauder. It's got a big circular stuff behind it. Whenever Graveblade Marauder deals combat damage to a player, that player loses life equal to the number of creature card in your hand. There's a couple of things wrong with this card. In your graveyard. Did I say in my hand? That makes no sense. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. This card can be very good and will probably be pretty decent when it comes to commander. The ability to just nug your opponents for 12 out of a pretty scary place is very good, especially if you're playing something Mogus Marauder to give this guy haste and intimidate. The thing I don't like about it is that it's a 2 and a black 1/4. Those stats don't really make much sense on 2 and a black on 3 mana black creatures. And its ability is just very oddly placed. I just don't like it design-wise, personally. I'm not Wizards. I shouldn't be commenting on design because they have people that have been doing it for 20 years. But I still just don't like the design of this guy. Will he see playing Commander? Maybe. I like Guilt Feeder better, which is just right down here, because he's got Fear, and whenever he attacks and isn't blocked, if any player loses 1 life for each card in their graveyard. This guy's just much better. I just don't like Graveblade Marauder that much. I just don't see it getting in there. It does have Death Touch, so it's harder to block, which is nice, but when you're playing Commander, that's not really something you worry about too much. I could see it seeing play in Standard, maybe, because it dodges Lightning Strike very well, and stuff like Bioblight. It's got 4 toughness, which is like the magic number, even though Roast exists. But let's be honest, this guy's probably not going to see much play when it comes to Commander, unless you're building a deck specifically around Black Warriors. Does that deck exist yet? I guess I've seen Mardu Warrior decks based around Zergo, so you could definitely be playing this like a Mardu Warrior build, so that this guy can hit for 5 if he's unblocked. Then you still have to make sure this guy isn't blocked, and that's just an extra hoop you have to go through for this random Horned Turtle that's 2 and a black. Yeah. And it's definitely not Baby Phage. Phage kills people. This like hits them for 4. Oh hey, look, this is our new is everybody ready for their new Stromkirk Noble, or their new just this, yeah, whatever. It's a red 1 mana 1/1 with Renown 1. As long as it's renowned, it has Menace. It's gonna be okay. I don't know. I'm not excited about this card, especially not for EDH. Guy's Revenge is coming back, guys. It's now a rare. You play with Guy's Revenge. I don't need to talk about Guy's Revenge. I do need to talk about this card, though. Hey, have you seen Starfield the Next? I'm just asking because this card is fantastic. It's a 4 and a white enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Woo! As long as you control 5 or more enchantments, each other non-or enchantment you control is a creature in addition to its other types, and has base power and toughness equal to its CMC. This card is fantastic. Of note, if you have any sort of gods like Karametra, as Valentine Steinberger mentions, it makes your gods into enchantment creatures immediately. Which is awkward, actually, because depending on when this comes down, you have some weird layers things going on. But this card is going to see play in Commander, just like that Centaur you mentioned earlier that made enchantments cost 1 less and gained you life when you cast them. This card is 100% going to see play. I would get a foil of it because I bet you the foil looks beautiful. And I cannot wait to play in our upkeep deck, because in our upkeep deck, this card is going to be sick. It's going to be so much fun. Timestamps. Did I say layers? I meant timestamps. Thank you. But yeah, this card's going to be a bunch of fun. I don't really know if there's much more to talk about when it comes to this type of card. Probably going to be pretty decent in Heliod. You do want to make sure you have an exact bent on enchantments. I see this seeing actually a decent amount of play in any sort of prison deck. Actually, sorry, let me rewind that back. I would not play this in a deck that's looking to play propaganda effects or ghostly prison effects. By making your enchantments into creatures actually much easier to kill. One of the best parts about prison decks that play stuff like Coxswain Falls or play stuff like, again, ghostly prison, is that those cards can't be wrathed away unless your opponent's playing Purify. No one's crazy enough to play Purify, I think, except for me. Or they're playing Austere Command. So, a word of warning. If you're playing a Grand Arbiter Gust in the 4th deck, and you put this into your build expecting to just be able to bring back your cards like Propaganda, I would actually expect those cards to die. And I would not be playing in a deck like that. If you're playing an Enchantress deck, though, that's really looking to make their enchantments into these big creatures, being able to attack with a 3/3 Enchantress presence, and be able to get that repeatable enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield, this card is definitely going to pull its own weight and be good in this type of effects. But again, be very cautious about putting this deck into a prison-type deck. When you're animating your propagandas and your ghostly prisons, you're going to have a bad time. Yep, Evolutionary Leap is very good. Soulblaze Djinn, I think it's worth noting. It's a 5-mana 4/3. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, creature you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. This is Talrand's best friend, actually. I would definitely say we are putting this in Talrand now. When it comes out, we'll put it into Talrand. But it's a 5-mana 4/3 flyer, which is already good enough. But being able to play in a deck that already has buyback abilities, or just wants to be playing cards like Turnabout, makes Soulblade Djinn a finisher in your Talrand deck. There was a monk that did this recently in, like, I think Fate Reforged, Strong Arm, something. I don't know what the name of that thing was. But this guy's just better. He's already a good enough body. 5-mana 4/3 flyer has always been good enough, even though it dies a lightning bolt. When it comes to Commander, again, a deck like Talrand, or even a bird deck. You can play a Djinn in a bird deck, trust me. Like Kangi Airy Keeper. Would love to make his flyers get +1/+1 for a very low cost. So, would heavily expect to see this guy in Commander, and explicitly in decks that are token based that have a bunch of flyers that want that extra +1/+1 a bunch of times. Yeah. Hey, look, Demonic Pact. That card I'm not playing in our upkeep deck. It's a 4-mana enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose one that has been chosen. Demonic Pact deals 4 damage to target creature or player and you gain 4 life. Target opponent discards 2 cards, draw 2 cards, and then of course the last one, you lose the game. Very important. If you do donate this to somebody, those choices don't reset. So if you're playing a deck that's looking to donate cards to your opponents, which funnily enough, this doesn't go into everyone's favorite Minotaur Monk. Demonic Pact can be pretty good. If you're playing like a blue-black deck that's looking to play stuff like Illusion of Grandeur, looking to play stuff like Delusions of Mediocrity, I think Demonic Pact immediately goes in that deck. Being able to donate your opponent a card that lets them lose the game is very good. Yeah. Puka's Mischief. I think I immediately said I'm not playing this. I think nobody said, well, what about Puka's Mischief? And I was like, oh yeah, Puka's Mischief exists. Yeah. Demonic Pact, again, I would only see it being played in a commander deck that's looking to donate cards. So, if you see your opponent play Demonic Pact, be ready for the donate. Embermaw Hellion, I think, is actually a very interesting card. I love Hellions ever since Greater Maw. 3 red for a 4/5 Trampler. If another, not this one, if another red source you control will deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage, +1 to that permanent player instead. This is an anthem to your red tokens. Makes them all deal extra damage, which is really, really, really nice. It also, like, does even better if you have damage doubling effects, like Furnace of Wrath. It makes them even stronger. I would definitely suggest playing this in decks like Nikasar, as Tyler Godfrey mentions from Simpson College. Man, Facebook comments are weird. But if you're playing non-combat damage sources, like I guess Nikasar is a very good example of this, Emerald Hellion can do some pretty cool things. It is also a 4/5 at trample, which is good enough stats for 5 mana already. And if you're playing a Treble Hellion deck, you can do some pretty cool things. Actually, I really like this card with Ulash, the Hate Seed. Ulash doesn't get enough love, but when it comes to commander, she can do some pretty cool things. And it's also very good in Borborosy and Rage deck. Being able to make him throw mountains even harder is a good way to make that shotgun type build work better. He's going to be pretty cool. I would definitely try him out. I don't think he's going to be the best card ever made, but he's going to be pretty fun. Pretty good with Purphoros, as True Keys mentions, is also a very good point. The Great Aurora. The Mythics in this set just knock it out of the park. This is a 9 mana sorcery, which is almost too much mana, but let's be honest, we play EDH. There's no such thing as too much mana. Each player shuffles all cards from their hand and all permanents they own into their library, then draws that many cards. Each player may put any number of land cards from their hand to the battlefield, then exile the Great Aurora. This harkens back to... Excuse me. This harkens back to Lorwyn and Shadowmoor, where basically when Lorwyn turned into Shadowmoor, the Great Aurora happens. That's what this card is referenced to. You will see this card in Commander. The funny part about this is if your opponent has like a mana reflection in play, and they can float their mana, if you're playing against something like Borborosy and Rage, because now you can put your commander into the command zone instead of putting it into the library. If your opponent has enough mana, they can just float enough mana to be able to play something like a Borborygmos, or even something like a Seismic Assault, and kill you. The amount of cards that you expect to draw is very high. Is this a replacement for Warp World? I say no. Warp World is a very strong card because it puts stuff besides lands into play, and leads to these loops that allow you to win the game immediately. I know when you ever see us play the Raid Mother deck that's made to loop Warp Worlds, there's a lot of cards that are very important in that deck, like Anarchist and stuff like that, that really allow the deck to work appropriately. This is not that card. The Great Aurora will see playing Commander just as a way to like say, everybody calm your shit down, we need to take a deep breath. And I would actually expect to see some play in some tokens deck. But it's a very odd sort of balance you have to play with this kind of card. Although you're the first person that gets to use their mana after you put those lands into play, if you're already playing a token that's looking to amass enough tokens to be able to get a value out of the Great Aurora, you're putting yourself behind on board pretty quickly. If you're playing a red-green deck that can at least put down a haste enabler, you're going to be able to do some pretty cool things after casting the Great Aurora, because it does cost 9, and it's kind of like one of those free spells from Time Spiral block, not Time Spiral, from Urza's block, because you get those lands into play untapped immediately, which is actually, I think, pretty cool, and might make this card a lot better than it looks like on the surface. So the card I would like this to a lot more would be something like a Time Spiral more than anything else, which for me is really scary. Actually, this is just a green Time Spiral that also gets rid of the cards on the battlefield, which I don't think there's a way to combo off with it, but it does work with Storm pretty well. So have fun, I guess. Wow, does this make Blue-Green Storm really good? This probably makes Blue-Green Storm a lot better. You can just cast the Great Aurora, get a bunch of lands back into play, and then have all those triggers back on the stack, brain freeze your opponent, cast. Let's play Storm. Let's play Storm. Kythos Irregular is a 4 mana 4/3 with a now 1. Just white, tap target creature. It's a human soldier. I don't know if this is going to be good enough for soldier decks, but there's always room for creatures in soldier decks. It's always like soldiers you can take out and soldiers you can put in. Everyone has a different build for their soldier decks. The main thing for me is that white is actually pretty prohibitive when you put it into multicolor decks. This is not the kind of card I would want to put into a red-white deck. Although it's a pretty cool card and, you know, it's got I think the art's pretty cool. There's a bunch of irregulars, which is conveniently enough 4 of them. I don't expect to see this in a lot of decks, and I don't expect to see this in a lot of decks. That white is very prohibitive. There's a lot of better cards that do an ability similar to it. Days Undoing, though. Hey there, Days Undoing. Have you met my friend Teferi? 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. If it's your turn, you end the turn. I mentioned this card when we streamed about it earlier. This card does a lot of different things. The main thing it does is, of course, the Time Spiral. Not a Time Spiral. going to say Time Spiral effect for fun, just because Time Spiral was the better one. But that shuffling into hand, drawing 7 cards is obviously very strong. If you're playing Nikasar, this is the kind of card you want to be able to play, so your opponents are forced to draw 7 cards. The funny part is that you actually don't want to play this in Nikasar, because since it ends the turn during your turn, the triggers from Nikasar get exiled from the stack. So, really important. Don't play this card in Nikasar unless you're playing it on your opponent's turn, because the triggers from the stack won't go onto the stack because the turn gets ended. Also, when you cast it during your turn, it will exile itself because it's on the stack and doesn't resolve while the turn ends. Very weird how that works, but if you ever played against Time Stop, you'll understand very similar cards. Time Stop would always exile itself because you're ending the turn. Make sure you play this on your opponent's turn, otherwise you don't get those triggered abilities. Now, I have seen this card talked a little bit about when it comes to Standard and Modern, because if you're playing like a blue-red burn deck, you don't care. You just go, yeah, sure, I'm going to Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt you. And then I'm going to have 1 card in hand. I'm going to cast Days Undoing. I'll have all this mana left up too, and I'll have 7 cards during your turn. And in those situations, when it comes to Standard and Modern, I definitely understand this card seeing a nice amount of play. When it comes to EDH, I don't see this card seeing play if you're not playing a deck that really wants to focus on playing cards on your opponent's turn. Again, Teferi. Of note, I did mention this earlier when we first talked about this card, but effects that trigger at the end of turn, like this person mentions, Ball Lightning or an Earth, are actually very interesting with Days Undoing because it does end the turn. So if you do have something like a Quicken, you can cast Days Undoing in response to an Unearth ability going off, like in a Cedrus the Traitor King deck, exile that effect from the stack, and then it won't trigger again, which is pretty fun. But you still already need to be able to cast at instant speed, and sometimes you just rather cast it during somebody else's turn. And in a Cedrus deck, you also don't want to shuffle away your graveyard, so going to be a very interesting card to see played in Commander. I definitely do think it will see play in Commander. There are definitely decks that do want to play it, but again, it is not nearly as good in a deck like Nikasar as you think it is, because it will exile those Nikasar triggers from the stack and they will not go off. I just want to warn you before you make that mistake, because I know I was about to make that mistake too. Just watch out for it. I know Teferi's decks cast stuff at instant speed a lot. Sorry. Whenever I think of Teferi decks, I think that everything has flash, because they always have flash. 5 mana Dark Petition is not a card I expect to see much play in Commander. It's a 5 mana tutor effect, and with Spell Mastery you get a Dark Ritual. That just doesn't really matter that much. I'd rather play Increasing Ambition over this every single time. Goblin Pile Driver is coming back. I was very happy I didn't have to see Goblin Pile Driver in people's Commander decks because they just didn't have enough money to buy them. Now they have enough money to buy them, and I'm scared again. Diamond's Elite is a 2 mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, if you control another elf, you put a 1/1 elf warrior into play. This is going to see playing in Commander decks. Being able to put 2 elves into play for 2 mana is very efficient, especially if one of those elves was Hermit Druid, not Hermit Druid. Shoot. I hope it'll just show me what it is when I click on it. Do you have it? No. Come on, someone had to talk about this already. Heritage Druid. Yeah, Heritage Druid, which is the green mana. That's the card I'm thinking of, right? Yeah, this is great with Heritage Druid, by the way, because you go turn 1 Heritage Druid, turn 2 this, make 3 mana, play your Azuri. That is silly. It is legitimately silly, and something I don't look forward to play against in my opponent's Commander deck for a long, long time. So I definitely expect to see played in Elvish Commander decks. Just like our other previous Merfolk, the really big bent on this card is its creature type, and that elf is very important. EDH is kind of where we see creature types reign very powerful. You should be playing Pile Driver then. The reason why I don't like Dark Petition, very quickly from True Keys, I'm surprised I don't like it. There are just better tutors in EDH. Remember, in Standard it's pretty cool. Like, oh, we have a 5 mana tutor, that's awesome, we didn't have one available to us already. You can already play Demonic Tutor, which is a 2 mana tutor, or Increasing Ambition, which is 3 tutors in a single card. This Spell Mastery ability, which you already have to have 2 or more instant sources in your graveyard, isn't that great. It's a Dark Ritual on top of your Dark Petition. So you can pay 5 Dark Petition and then play like a Phyrexian Arena. That's cute. You can Dark Petition for a Necropotence and play Necropotence. That's also pretty cute. But overall, I'd rather play Increasing Ambition, I think, every single time. The art's pretty cool, though. But besides that, I just don't think it's what I'm looking for when it comes to Commander. Tobin Freeblade is a 2-mana soldier with Visions of Renown. Not really something to talk about. Jace's Sanctum, I think, is something to talk about. It's very interesting to me. It's a 3 and a blue enchantment. Instant sorcery spells you cast, cost 1 less to cast. Already good enough, and it's not universal. Whenever you cast any sorcery spell, you scry 1. As we mentioned earlier, with the Stormblaze Jhin, that was great for Talrand. Jace's Sanctum, also amazing for Talrand. Oh, talking about the tutor in Legacy Storm? They're going to get the 5 mana? Nice, congratulations. I guess you can tutor for your... I don't know, man. I'm not feeling it. I'm going to be honest, I'm not feeling it. You're going to get the 5 mana in Legacy Storm? Nice, good job. But yeah, Jace's Sanctum, I definitely expect to see playing Commander. Very good in Melek. Actually, great in Melek. Great in Talrand again. I think I keep mentioning Talrand's name throughout this entire just like talking about spoilers. This set is a boon to Talrand. If you're a Talrand player and you're like entrenched, like you have a foil Talrand and like Altered Drakes, just buy a box of this set already. This is your favorite set ever. Just get it right now. Let's be honest. Ad Nauseam's 5, yeah. Yeah, sure, Tybucks, go for it. Unholy Hunger, just a 5-mana target creature. You gain 2 life, not good enough for a commander. Hey, a legendary creature we can talk about. Hey guys, check out this 4-mana 2/2 that enters the battlefield and put 2 Thoppers into play. And for 2 and a red, you can sack an artifact to deal 2 damage to our creature player. Again, I think it's important to mention that combat damage does have to be dealt for commander damage. So you cannot deal commander damage with that 2R ability. It's a very interesting card when it comes to Commander. There's already cards that kind of do better things than this when it comes to Commander. Although it's very flavorful and it's pretty cool, and if you love Chandra's backstory, I can definitely see people playing this in a Chandra type deck. I really don't see this guy seeing a lot of play because it just gets crowded out by commanders like Deretti or even Bosch, which just seem better than a Pia and Kieran Nalaar. Again, card's very cool, flavorfully, it's really awesome, and I can definitely see people playing this card based off flavor. Vash. But it's not a card I'm looking to play. I just don't think it's that great when it comes to a commander. Getting 2/1s into play and it being a 2/2 for 4 just isn't what you want to be doing. And again, a card like Bosch, I feel, is just better on its own. So when it comes to commander, I don't expect to see this as a very strong commander in the command zone. In the other 99, I would expect to see it. I think we're going to be seeing the rise of a blue-red artifact-based strategy sometime soon. This is very good in a blue-red artifact strategy. Putting 2/1s into play that can be flickered is very strong. Again, very importantly, Kiki-Jiki can't target it because it's legendary. But you can do some pretty cool things with Pia and Kieran Nalaar, especially if you get to bounce this guy a bunch of times. But I don't expect much. Again, there's flavor and the art is very cool, and I can definitely see people playing it just based off of flavor and art, and it is 4 power for 4 mana. But again, I don't expect to see much playing Commander. In Standard, it might be good enough just for 4 power and 4 mana, but I don't expect much. Hey, Sylvan Messenger! Wait, it's resolving the host. There we go. Hey look, it's Sylvan Messenger. 3 and a green for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all elf cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest in the body library anyways. It's almost like a card like this already sees playing Commander. It does, because it exists. Blessed Spirits, also in contest for one of the creepiest cards printed in a long time. 2 and a white for a flying 2/2. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you put a +1/+1 counter onto Blessed Spirits. Reminiscent of Celestial Ancients, which is a 3/3 flying for 5. You now have a 2/1, a 2/2 flying for 3. At the least, it's a Windrake. You can definitely play this in Limited. I'm not playing it in EDH. Number 1, art's kind of creepy. Number 2, it's actually going in our Spooky Ghost deck, by the way, because it's a Spooky Ghost. I really want to put that out there. But I'm not playing this card in EDH. It needs too much to become good enough to be played in EDH. You need to at least cast 2 enchantments to make this into a 4/4 to make it worth it for me to play this in Commander. So, yeah. Not all heroes die in armor. Yeah, that's just sad as hell. Hey, you guys ready for one of the weirdest commanders I've seen in a while? Hey guys, it's a legendary Sphinx. That's a 7-mana 5/5 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. You choose the name of a non-land card revealed this way. Your opponents can't cast spells with the chosen name. I'm just gonna keep shrugging my shoulders. I don't expect this to see much play as a commander. It will see play in commander decks because people like Sphinxes. I've seen a couple of tribal Sphinx decks pop up here and there, and they've all been kind of interesting. They haven't been great, but they've been interesting, and I just would not expect this to be see play as a commander. If it does, feel free to like, huh, Tom, dummy, of course his cards he's playing commander. The main reason why I don't think it's going to see playing commander is that you do have to choose the name of a non-land card revealed this way. If you could just choose any card, like a Meddling Mage, it'd be much, much, much better, because you can name your opponent's commanders. Unless your opponent's commander is in their hand, Alhamerit High Arbiter does nothing. Yeah. Tainted Remedy, though, we'll see much more play than that Alhamat guy. 2 and a black enchantment. If an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. Have you heard of Rainagore? This is Rainagore, but in just black. I cannot wait to cast this card. This card is going to be great, and we'll see a lot of utility in black decks, and I'm playing it in, like, well, I'm not playing it in Erebos, because that defeats the purpose of Erebos, but I cannot wait to play this card when my opponent can no longer play Exsanguinate and Death to the Death List, and it looks at Gary and it goes, meh! Can't wait to play it. It's going to be very good. I think it's great. Drink this, brother. It will bring you rest. Also nominated for some creepy ass names, but yeah, it's like Reign of Gore, just youthful. Exactly. I'm excited to play Tainted Remedy. I'm very glad it's not restricted to red black, and it's gonna be fun, man. It's gonna be fun. So I like how there's just like a line of cards that are 100% gonna see playing commander. Flame Shadow Conjuring is a 3 and a red enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you can play red. If you do, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste, exile it at the beginning of the next end step. Looking at you, Kiki Jiki. This card's going to be very good. Expect to see playing commander. There's a card that is similar to this, not Splinter Twin, but Minion Reflector, that I've definitely played in decks before because it's good enough. If you're playing a deck like Riku, this card is really great. Being able to make those copies of creatures for a single red mana is something that Riku would love to do. Plus the fact that the token gains haste. I mean, just think of Inferno Titans and stuff like that. This card gets very, very, very good very quickly. And I like paying 6 mana for Mold Drifters that give me 2 Drifters and draw me 4 cards. Flame Shadow Conjuring will see play in Commander. Will it see a lot of play? It's not going to see a lot of play. It's not going to be ubiquitous across the format. But it's definitely going to see play in Commander, and is a card you should keep in mind when building decks that have a lot of enter the battlefield effects. If you're playing Riku, this is definitely the kind of card I'd be looking out for if I was playing a Riku deck. Being able to get 2 copies of card like, I don't know, Woodland Bellower seems really good. By the way, Woodland Bellower is a 6 mana 6/5. It's a beast. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a non-legendary green creature card with CMC 3 or less. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. This guy goes in Commander. He's going to be very good. At the very least, you're getting Eternal Witness. You're getting Sakura Tribe Elders. You're getting Yavimaya Elders. You're getting Reclamation Sages. You're getting Sylvan Messenger. You're getting so many great cards with Woodland Bellower. And it's a 6 mana 6/5 on its own. It can get multicolored cards, like you can be getting, stuff like Scab Clan Marauders. You can be getting a lot of really, 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 really fun things. And I expect to see this guy see a lot of playing Commander. Plus, you can flicker it. It's not a cast trigger. So being able to get more and more 3 CMC green creature cards is going to be fantastic. Deathmist Raptor in... Oh, Jesus Christ. Deathmist Raptor in Standard. Boyko, good point. Good point indeed. That's scary, actually. That's very scary. That's very scary, actually. Oh, God. Oh, God. This guy can get Deathmist Raptors. We're all dead. We're all dead. And then Hixus. 3 white for 4/4 with Flash. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, if this enters the battlefield this turn, exile that creature. If this entered the battlefield this turn, exile that creature until Hixus leaves the battlefield. This reminds me of a Kamigawa card that I can't remember the name of. It's like a 3 and a white 2/2. Whenever you deal damage, your opponent sacrifices a permanent. Hixus is going to be okay. I don't think it's that great because you already have to be dealt the combat damage. What's very cool, though, is as a commander, your opponents just never want to attack you when you have 5 mana up because you can just cast Hixus. The main issue is that it won't protect you from your opponents playing with Met Discharge or Titanic Ultimatums because you will just die. If your opponent plays Creative Hoof Behemoth, Hixus doesn't really help. I think he's okay. I don't think he's great. And I don't think he's going to be replacing a lot of those other soldier legends. He's fine against tokens and nothing much else. Clash of Wills, counter target spell unless the controller pays X. Hey look, another legendary creature. Kothoped, Hoarder of Souls. It's a 6-mana flying 6/6. Whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you draw 1 card and lose 1 life. I expect to kill so many people with this card just by killing around permanents. Very, very, very good creature. 6 mana 6/6 flyer, already good enough, especially as a commander. It doesn't have that beautiful 7 power, so you can kill people in 3 hits. It still requires 4 hits. That being said, this card will be a bomb when it comes to commander. Being able to play something like a Black Sun Zenith, wrathing away your opponent's creatures, and then just drawing 10 cards is going to be so much fun. This is a card that I can't wait to play with. I will be putting into specific decks so I can utilize them effectively. But at the very least, just if you take away the other ability, he's at base a 6 mana 6/6 flyer. It's a black creature. It's a demon, and I believe it will see playing commander. As a commander itself, I know it's going to see playing the other 99. As a commander itself, it's very interesting to me. That ability can definitely kill you. I've killed people due to their own dark prophecies before, and this feels like a card that could really screw you over. If your opponent just decides to play something, just decides to play a White Sun Zenith and then all of its creatures die, it's very easy for them to kill you as well. You will need ways to recoup that life. So if you're going to be building this creature, definitely make sure you bring your Garys, bring your Whippet Ereboses, make sure you can recoup that life very easily. But overall, Kotho-fed Soul Hoarder will see uncommon play as a commander, but we'll definitely see play in the other 99 EDH decks. Not 6/6/6 though. Spooky. Avarice Dragon, Avaricious Dragon is not a card that we'll see play in commander. It's a 4 mana flying 4/4. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. No. Daiwen Guiltleaf Dian is a 4 mana 3/4 reaching elf warrior. Other elves get +1/+1. Whenever this attacks, you gain 1 life for each attacking elf you control. Very reminiscent of Rise the Exiled with that attacking trigger. But overall, there's just so many better elf legends in this creature that it just won't see play as far as a commander. It will see play in the other 99, but the amount of elves I'd rather play over this guy is not innumerable, but many of them. I'd rather play Yeva, I'd rather play Elamari, Lord of Leaves, I'd rather even play Rise the Redeemed or Rise the Exiled, I'd rather play Azuri 100%, and even just Edric. So for me, I don't expect to see this in my opponent's command zone, but I definitely expect to see it in their commander deck. Again, in the other 99. Tunnel the Internal Watch. At the beginning of combat, each opponent's turn, tap target creature the player controls. Not good enough. Sphinx's Tutelage is a pretty fun card. It's a 3-mana enchantment. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills the top 2 cards of their library. If they're both non-land cards that share a color, repeat this process. Of note, do remember that Painter's Servant is banned in Commander, so you can't just go off with Sphinx's Tutelage. But there are definitely decks that want to be playing this card. At the very least, whenever you draw a card, you get to mill your opponents for 2. I know there's a lot of mill cards in Commander, and a lot of people like playing mill. I, again, do not support mill. I think it's not good enough for Commander. Your opponents start off, you got 3 opponents instead of 1. They now have decks that are composed of 99 cards instead of 60, and it's much more difficult. But I would definitely expect to see this card in those mill decks. The ability to just draw a card and mill your opponents is very, very, very strong. Yeah, it also says, yeah, they're both non-land cards. Not the same color, sorry, non-land cards. But yeah. It will see play in Commander Mill, and it might be decent enough, but overall, if you're playing Mill, I would support playing this card. I think it's good enough, and it should be pretty fun. Yeah, I don't think New Gideon's that great. It's better than Isamaru Honda Konda, but only a little bit, because he then gets transformed into Big Gideon. That's harder to get through somehow. I put him on par with Isamaru, and that already isn't that great. Languish, 4 mana, all creatures get -4, -4 on a turn. Great for standard and modern, you know, like, oh great, we get a 4 mana kind of Wrath. Do remember, in Commander you can play Damnation. In Commander you can play Mutilate, so I don't expect to see much play in Commander. Although the art's really cool. Ooh, this is fun, I didn't know I could do this. Look at that. Ho-ho. 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 But Languish, very cool creature. Very cool sorcery. I don't expect to see much play in Commander. There's just better cards that do better things. Exquisite Firecraft, 3 mana sorcery, deals 4 damage to our creature player. Spell Mastery, if there's 2 or more sorceries, it can't be countered by spells or abilities. There aren't many cards that are looking for another Char effect, so I don't expect to see much. Same with Honored Hierarch, green mana, 1/1 for renown 1, as long as it's renowned, it has Vigilance, and tap, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I don't think it's nearly as bad as people are saying it is, like, oh, it's so much worse than Noble Hierarch. It is, but so? It's an interesting card. Again, I don't expect to see any play in Commander. There's just better cards like Noble Hierarch that exist. Enshrining Mist is just, again, a limited common. Same as Send to Sleep. Narwood Trapper is at least interesting. It's a black 1/1 that you can pay 1 life to add green to your mana pool, or give target attacking elf Death Touch. Interesting, but not great. Enthralling Victor, I think, is pretty cool. It's a 4 mana 3/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you get to threaten a creature power 2 or less. This is the type of card that I like playing in aggressive decks like Exava, Blood Witch. You can just get that early damage in. It's a pretty fun card, but I don't think it's the best card ever. Most important thing is that it's gain control of target creature and opponent controls with power 2 or less. If it was just a creature power 2 or less, you could go infinite with Kiki-Jiki, which would be really fun. But you can't with this. Yeah, so. Mana Gorger Hydra. 2 and a green, 1 with trample. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a +1 counter onto Mana Gorger Hydra. Very similar to Cream Dryad. Not as much Forgotten Ancient. It's really fun seeing these cards on the bottom. Like, oh, this is very useful. Thank you. But of course, Forgotten Ancient could always distribute those counters. Mana Gorger Hydra cannot. I would expect to see this card in Hydra decks, and it's very similar. It's like the green Tauren Mauler, I guess is the best way to put this. Except that it's trample. Tauren Mauler, legitimately better on MTGO than in real life. It's really fun. There aren't many cards that are just better on MTGO than in real life. Tauren Mauler, definitely one of those cards that is much better on MTGO than in real life, because you can't forget its trigger. Mana Gorger Hydra will be another card that is just better in MTGO than in real life, because you can't forget its trigger. And of note, it is whenever a player casts a spell, which does make it a little bit better than Tauren Mauler, because you can cast the spells, which is really fun. If you're like Elvish Furying your Mana Gorger Hydra, you can do some pretty cool things. But overall, I'm not incredibly impressed. It's battling for a very hard slot at 3, and I wouldn't really expect to see it in any decks that aren't explicitly decks that are trying to play a bunch of Hydras, or decks that are looking to really utilize +1/+1 counters. Being able to play Mana Gorger Hydra and then playing a card like Doubling Season will make Mana Gorger Hydra better, but even in those situations, there's just better cards to play the Mana Gorger Hydra. Limited common. Fairy Miscreant is a flying 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you control another creature named Fairy Miscreant. Draw a card. Common for limited common, limited common, limited common. EDH uncommon. Elemental Bond is a card that is very good. If you ever heard of a card called Kavulayer, Kavulayer was already good enough. Like it was already okay. Elemental Bond is great. 2 and a green enchantment. Whenever creature power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. There are going to be a large amount of decks that want to play a card like this, especially tribal elf decks or just green stompy decks. Play this card in a Borborygmos deck. In fact, I wish it was legal so I can put it in my Borborygmos deck I just built again. So much value you're going to be getting off this card. There's a lot of ways to make 3/3s. I can just imagine Terracydonning 3 of my land just drawing 4 cards. This card is going to be so good in Commander. Play it. Just play it. If you're like, Tom, you're wrong on this. This card is terrible. How dare you play a card that doesn't get value on its own? Just play it and just play it. It's going to be great. Also, I hope you don't sound like that. That'd be very disappointing. Limited common, limited common, limited common, limited common. This is interesting. 2 and a green sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic forest cards and reveal them. Then put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and put the rest into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Oh, hey, it's like a Worse Cultivate. If there are 2 or more sorcery and or instant cards in your graveyard, you may search your library for up to 3 basic forest cards instead. It's strictly... I don't know if it can break its way into Commander. There's just cards that do so much better things than this. I would rather play a card like Cultivate or Kodama's Reach over Nissa's Pilgrimage because it gets stuff that isn't forest. Also, one of my favorite cards, Far Wanderings, it just feels better than Nissa's Pilgrimage all over it. Card, Far Wanderings. A card that just doesn't give it the love it needs. It's another 2 and a green sorcery, but it's got Threshold. And if you have Threshold, you get to get 3 basic lands instead of 1 basic land to play. Just feel like I'd rather play Far Wanderings over Nissa's Pilgrimage every single time. It's a very interesting card, and if you're playing a deck that's really flavorful for Nissa, it could definitely find its place into there. But there's just so much better cards in Commander, I don't expect to see its ability to break its way into the format. If you're playing a mono green deck, you can make your argument that, no, Tom, Nissa's Pilgrimage is worth it. Because in my mono green deck, I could pay 2 and a green to get 2 basic lands. And then I would just say, why aren't you just playing Explosive Vegetation, or why aren't you just playing just anything else? Like, it just doesn't get there for me. The funny part is, as opposed to like Standard or Modern, where you don't have as much to rail against, when it comes to Commander, there are so many things you have to fight against to be good enough. Patron of the Valiant is interesting, because whenever it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. And it itself is a 5-mana Flying Angel. There are going to be decks that want to utilize this type of ability. Looking at green-white decks that really hinge on +1/+1 counters as a way to win the game. But overall, not really a card I would expect to see played that much. It's great and limited because it's a 5-mana 4/4 flyer that's already good enough. But very, very, very niche card when it comes to Commander, and not a lot of play in general. Hydrolash could... No, it's not, let's be honest. I think Seismic Elemental is very interesting. It's a 5-mana 4/4. When it enters the battlefield, creatures without flying can't block this turn. This is the exact kind of card you want in a very aggressive red deck. The Falter ability on a 5-mana 4/4 is very, very, very strong. And if you're playing any sort of elemental tribal effects, this deck could be insanely good. I could 100% see sliding this into a Horde of Notions deck just as a way to give myself a Falter in an elemental card that is repeatable with Horde of Notions, that can also get hastened into play with the Elemental Lord. I'm not saying this card is going to see a lot of play in Commander. In fact, I don't think it's going to see I think it's going to see less than a marginal amount of playing in Commander. It's going to see some. Not a lot, but some. Limited common. Relic Seeker, this card's not good enough. Flores and Chapin were going off on this card like it's the best card ever made. It's not. It's a 1-white Renown 1/2/2. When it becomes Renowned, you may search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. It's not Stoneforge Mystic. It's really not Stoneforge Mystic. It is 100% not Stoneforge Mystic. A lot of the stuff that I've seen behind this guy is stuff like, oh, he's amazing, or oh, this card's going to break formats, or oh, this card is great. This card's not even close to great. I don't mean to be a downer on this one, but really, again, it has to deal combat damage. Doesn't get that ability when it enters the battlefield, and it has to be able to sneak through and deal damage. That's harder than it sounds. In Commander, if you get this guy on turn 2, yeah, you might be able to get that equipment out of your library and put it into your hand, but then you can't cheat it out for 2 mana, so it's not great with Argentum Armor. And on top of that, he's a terrible top deck. Stoneforge Mystic at least is great on turn 11. Relic Seeker is straight poop after turn 2. That is not good enough. Really, 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 really quickly, that is not good enough. Not for Standard or Modern. You'd have to get very lucky to get this guy on turn 2 and be able to get it through, especially in a 1v1 format. Not good enough. Don't buy this guy for $10. Please. Just don't do it. Save your money. Buy him for $1 instead. Just don't get cheated out of your money on this guy. Please. And if you have to Rogue's Passage or Relic Seeker, dude, there's something you could be doing better things with your mana. But anyways, interesting card. It will still see play in Commander. Sorry, I'm not saying it's unplayable in Commander. I think it's unplayable, but people will play this. People will play this in their soldier decks because it itself is a soldier. This is one of those times where that race class line matters a lot, because it being a soldier means you can give it first strike and get it evasion really quickly and easily. But if you draw it or put it into play anytime past turn 2, you are going to be disappointed very quickly. Especially since it doesn't have haste. Your opponents can even have a setup turn to be able to put a Yavimaya Elder in front of it. So don't spend a bunch of money on this card, please. Just don't do it. You will get burned by it. Separatist Void Mage, we have another Augury Adept, but it costs 3 and a blue instead of 1 blue. It's a human wizard. Probably not good enough. Rabid Bloodsucker, also not good enough. Volcanic Rambler, not going to get there. This is pretty interesting. It's a 2 and a green 1/3 with Renown 2. Whenever a creature you control becomes Renown, draw a card. It might be decent and limited if you can build together a Renown deck. But we're going to talk about Renown really quickly, because Renown gets under my skin. Renown is a cool ability, but it's a very tricky one that does not seem that great. When this creature, Renown specifically says you have to deal combat damage to a player to get that ability. If it isn't Renown, put 2+1 counters on it, because that's Renown 2. When you're playing limited, don't get trapped by Renown. If I put down a Horned Turtle, your creature will not get its ability. If I put down a 1/3, a 1/4, if I even block with a 3/3, it's not Bloodthirst. You can't get that ability unless you clear a way for your creature in the first place. It's probably one of the most win more mechanics I've seen in a very long time. And I know we're supposed to be EDH focused, and I'm supposed to be just talking about EDH. Renown is terrible in EDH, by the way, just super terrible in EDH. But the fact that you have to deal combat damage to get this ability on the creature is not a great ability. I would liken this to something much worse than Bloodthirst, and Bloodthirst itself was pretty difficult to get active already, because it has to deal combat damage, which means the creature has to get through. And a lot of these Renowned creatures don't have evasion. They're just kind of bad creatures with a decent upside. You can get them through other creatures. When I'm drafting this set, I'm not going to be looking at... I would not suggest looking at Renowned creatures as these, whoa, this card's going to be great when I make it into a 3/5. You're not going to make it into a 3/5. It's very reliant on drawing your cards and the right curve selection, and it's very reliant on your opponent just not blocking, which, welcome to Limited, your opponents block. I'm not a very big fan of Renown, and please, just don't get trapped by it. The same reason why the Renown Weaponsmith isn't that great is the same reason why Renown probably won't be that great in Limited. It feels like a huge trap derp. I would not try and go with it. So, what I mean by that is, like, this Rocks Maulers is a 4 and a green 4/4 with Trample. This is a good Renown card. This is a card that can get its ability to become a 6/6 or 4 because it has Trample, and that is good enough. Whereas your 2 and a white 3/2 with Renown 1 is also good enough because it's a 2 and a white 3/2. If this was a 2 and a white 2/1 with Renown 2, it would almost be unplayable. Make sure your Renown creatures already have good enough stats on their power and toughness before trying to play them in your limited deck. Otherwise, you'll just get burned by playing worse creatures in your limited deck, and that is not good enough. Speaking of good enough, limited, Conclave Naturalist is good enough. It's 4 and a green 4/4 when it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. Endring Stomp Howler was always playable. This is now a Dryad. If you're playing a deck that wants another Endring Stomp Howler, which you might be, you can play Conclave Naturalist. Of note, it is May, which is different than Endring Stomp Howler, which required you to do it. So if you're playing any sort of artifact acceleration on your own, you would have to destroy your own artifact acceleration. Now it's a May and you get to choose. But overall, not the best card ever made. And definitely probably not a card you're going to be looking to play because Acidic Slime just seems better. But can be played in Commander and you won't be laughed out of the room. Limited, 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 not limited. Valorant Acreos. 3 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. This card is actually pretty good. If you've ever played with Gold Knight Commander, that's very similar to this card except on a creature. Now you can get Gold Knight Commander not on a creature, which is on an enchantment, which is pretty decent. Very good in token making decks, especially if you can make those tokens at instant speed. All of a sudden, when you play that Secure the Waste, you're putting into play 5 6/6s because this will trigger Valor 5 times. The main thing is we already have a better card in Commander called Cathar's Crusade, which costs 5 and gives you the permanent pump ability. But this being an uncommon enchantment and not being 5 mana can make it good enough. If I'm playing a white deck that is very token based, especially green-white or red-green-white, if I'm playing something like Rift the Awakener, or if I'm playing something like Rise the Redeemed or Justani, Valorant Acreos can do some very good work. But most of the time, I'd rather have a Cathar's Crusade. Now, doesn't mean you can't play them next to each other. If you have out both Valorant Acreos and Cathar's Crusade, congrats on winning the game when you play at least 2 creatures. Limited, 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 limited. I think we might be out of Commander cards. Ooh, Terrorgeist is coming back. This is interesting. It's a 6-mana sorcery. Each creature you control gets +3/+3 until end of turn and must be blocked until end of turn. The problem is this card already existed as a rare in Predatory Rampage, and that's already hasn't been good enough. It's a great limited card because you get to kill all your opponent's creatures, but overall, we're not playing it in Commander. Just say it with me. We're not playing it in Commander. Cruel Revival is coming back. This is awesome. I love Cruel Revival, and I love the new art. I've played Cruel Revival in Zombie Commander decks, but that's about it. Elf Visionary coming back, obviously playable in Commander. Displacement Wave, I think, is very interesting. It's a X blue sorcery. Return all non-land permanents with CMC X or less to their owner's hand. As people have definitely mentioned, you can play 0 for your Displacement Wave to bounce all tokens without converted mana costs, which is actually a pretty valuable ability, but not a great ability. I mean, we're going to see this play in Commander. I would be very surprised if we didn't see this play in Commander. I think it is good enough to be in Commander, especially with the ability to augment it to where you're able to make sure you get rid of the cards you don't want to play against. Especially if you have a friend that plays a Tristani deck, by the way, it's going to be really fun to be able to displace and wave this stuff. Slip up, though. God damn it, Boyko. Charges Ignition. 3 red sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. Very good in Throwmock. I remember when this came out, immediately it was like, hey, let's play Throwmock. And this is amazing in the Throwmock. If you haven't seen Throwmock before, it's a 5-mana Hellion with Devour X. This basically means I play Throwmock, I play Charges Ignition, all of my opponents die. It's a great card. It's going to be very good as well in, like, some people out there play, like, Wall of Blood decks, where you put a bunch of life into Wall of Blood. Now you can just play Charges Ignition instead of playing a Fling effect. And what's also very cool is that creature you control deals the damage. So if you were to have a 10 power or greater infect creature, this will also kill your opponents. So keep stuff like that in mind, especially if you're playing against a deck like Heartless Hitsugo, a deck that really likes to give his commander infect. Charges Ignition is very good in a deck like Heartless Hitsugo as well. Is that really it for Magic Origins? Wow, they're the best. I think someone said 6 new cards came out. Oh yeah, they didn't get some of the cards. Okay. Reclusive Artificer, I think, is very interesting. When I said there might be a blue-red artifact deck coming out, I definitely meant Reclusive Artificer. 2 blue-red for a 2/3 haste. Whenever this enters the battlefield, you may have it deal damage to a creature equal to the number of artifacts you control. Chief of the Foundry, also going to see play in Commander. A 3-mana 2/3 that gives other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. Looking at you, Soul Foundry. This is going to be a great card. It's going to see a lot of play. It's going to see a lot of play in the artifact decks that want this type of effect. It's no Steel Overseer, but it's also going to be good in Limited. Erebos' Titan is very interesting. It's a 4-mana 5/5, which is, already good enough. But Titan Erebos has Indestructible as long as no opponent controls a creature, which is awkward but interesting. Whenever a creature leaves an opponent's graveyard, whether it's exiled or returned to play, you may discard a card. If you do, you return Titan of Erebos from your graveyard to your hand. This guy does not go away. Very good, funnily enough, with, of course, Erebos. I think it's very possible we do see Erebos in Commander. I don't think he's going to be an unbeatable card in Commander, but he's going to be very annoying and a great blocker, and a good way to just keep getting your Erebos Titan out of your graveyard. The other fun way is that you can reanimate your opponent's creatures from their graveyard, and then be able to bring back Titan Erebos that way too, which for me is hilarious and something I can't wait to do with something like Chainer. Oh, play the Titan with Portcullis. That's like a great idea. What else came out today? I think that's all that came out today. Yeah, there's the 1-mana 2/1 that can't attack alone. And I think we talked about everything else. Yeah, we did. Oh yeah. I missed all the... Where's the multicolor cards? I knew I wasn't done. Here we go. There's multicolor cards as well. Citadel Castellian is a 1 green white Vigilance Renown 2. Not good enough. Bounding Krasis, I think, is pretty cool. It's a 1 green blue 3/3 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you may tap or untap target creature. This seems good enough on stats alone. It's a 3-mana 3/3 with flash. And the ability to tap or untap creatures is great. Of course, it does go infinite with Kiki-Jiki if you want to go for Rug Kiki-Jiki. The build I've seen of that is actually a Maelstrom Wanderer deck that the only cards under 7 is like Kiki-Jiki and Pestermite. This can do the same thing. Blazing Hellhound is Magma. 2 black-red for a 4/3 that lets you pay 1 to attack a creature, another creature, to have a deal 1 damage to a creature or player. Zendikar Incarnate, I think, is actually a very interesting spell. 2 red green for star 4. Its power is equal to the number of lands you control. This reminds me of a card called Wilderness Elemental, which already came packaged with Trample, which I think is important. Actually, hey, look, it's right here. And there's also a Rebel Hulk. It continues in the long line of big, beefy, red-green creatures for Commander. I'm looking to play it, and I'm looking to play it in a Surak the Dragonclaw deck so I can give this guy Trample and hit my opponent's faces for 1 billion D damage. But besides that, he's going to see some play in Commander, but not a lot of it. Shaman of the Pack, which is a new way for black-green elf decks to kill you, which is, I guess, by playing black-green elf decks. 1 black-green for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to the number of elves you control. So, there aren't that many black-green elf decks because a lot of the black support for the black-green elf deck wasn't really there. No one was playing Hunter of Eyeblights. No one was playing the other black elves besides Nath the Guiltleaf. And Nath the Guiltleaf was definitely a black-green elf deck that was much more based on Nath's ability to do that when your opponent discards a card, you get one an elf. Shaman of the Pack might force elf decks into being black-based, or at least turn them into junk Abzan decks, because this effect is incredibly strong when it comes to elf decks. Good enough for Modern, might even be good enough for Standard, definitely good enough for EDH. It is target opponent instead of each opponent. They might have learned from Gary, but Shaman of the Pack will see play in EDH. Expect to see play in EDH, especially play especially in black-green elf decks, and it'll be pretty fun. We have some really interesting artifacts from this set, by the way. Pyromancer's Goggle, 5 mana to tap to add red to your mana pool. When that mana is spent to cast a red instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose 2 targets for the copy. This card's very weird for me. There's not many effects like this, so it's hard to base anything off of it. I'm not sure if it's good. I'm really not sure if it's good. It seems decent in Commander, but it has to be a red instant or sorcery spell, which definitely decreases its ability to be useful. I just really don't know. This is one of those cards that makes you just want to throw my hands up in the air and just... I'm just really not sure if it's good. It's probably going to be crap, and I wouldn't want to buy it for more than 50 cents. And at the same time, it could end up being busted, and I'm not giving it its due. But it's not spending more than 50 cents on these goggles. Alhamat's Archive, on the other hand, I know is amazing. 5 mana legendary artifact. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. Oh, alright, that's fine. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, just draw 2 cards instead. Hey, have you ever met this guy called Aloro? This card is going to be very good. There's already decks that love gaining life, and there's a lot of decks that love drawing cards. This card is going to be substantially strong, although it doesn't do anything on its own. I feel you. I feel you right now. You're sitting there and you're like, Tom, it doesn't do anything on its own. This card is terrible. Remember, we're playing EDH. We do a lot of things with our cards, especially from the command zone. This card will be good. I expect I would definitely want to pick it up. The best part is, no one's going to play it in Standard or Modern, which is awesome. Yay, EDH players. We get to pick this card up for $1, and it's going to do so much work for $1. This card is going to do an amazing amount of work for $1. Like, this is like bang for your buck if there ever was bang for your buck. Big fan of Alhamat's Archive from that standpoint. That's another fun part about EDH. There's all these mythic rares that no one in Standard or Modern like. They're like, oh, that card is terrible in Standard or Modern. No one wants to play S Monstrosity. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, man, I'll give you 50 cents for that card in an instant. Well of Lost Dreams also goes off with it. We got Hangerback Walker, by the way. This was Reddit's spoiler card. Double X for a 0/0 who enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies, put a 1/1 Thopter onto the battlefield with flying for each +1/+1 counter on Hangerback Walker. And for 1, you can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter onto Hangerback Walker. We all know the multiple ways to make this card better. There's Doubling Seasons, there's Parallel Lives, there's Primal Vigors, there's all those other cards. I just like to mention modular as another very fun thing to do with the Hangback Walker. It's going to be good. Is it going to be great? Maybe not, but it's at least going to be good. That's sometimes good enough. I am looking forward to playing it, and I am looking forward to losing to it. And it's also got really cool art, and it's a cool idea. It's the spider thing from Wild Wild West, and I can just imagine Will Smith battling on top of it, and just being like, welcome to a shitty movie that everyone likes for no good reason. Helm of the Gods, I mentioned this earlier as well. Earlier, as in a different stream. A 1-mana artifact where creature gets +1/+1. For each enchantment you control, equipped for 1. Very awkward because you want to be playing more enchantments than equipment in your enchantment deck, but it's a card that likes enchantments that sticks around past enchantments. If you're playing a deck like Bruno, you want to play Helm of the Gods. If you're playing a deck that likes to play cards like Retether, you want to play Helm of the Gods. This effect is very strong and definitely one that I think will see a lot of play in specific EDH decks. And it's probably going to be a beautiful foil. Great Anthony Palumbo art, and I know I will be getting one because I have some Enchantress decks that just wants a Helm. Veteran Sidearm is just not good enough, and the rest of this stuff is bleh. And then we have a return of the enemy Painlands. I think that's it for this set. Thank God, that's it for this set. My voice is about gone. And that really is about it. Is Magic the Gathering Online back yet?